Welcome, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, the AI Travel and Hospitality Edition, Beyond the Bookings. My name is Mario Kyriakou, and I'm the co-founder here at Analogic, and I'm pleased to be taking you through today's topic. So before we kick off, I'm going to start with a question. I don't think this is particularly AI specific. I think it applies to almost anything you do in terms of digital initiatives, anything sort of technology driven within an organization. So the question is AI the next evolution of marketing or just a giant distraction from the fundamentals? And what I mean by that is artificial intelligence has enormous potential to deliver value both internally for your internal teams. You could save time, be more efficient, deliver improved customer experiences at scale. Yes, that is all fundamentally true. But it's also true that if you pursue an AI initiative, it shouldn't just be because it's the big shiny object in the room. It should be because you have maxed out all of the base fundamentals in terms of marketing. You've got the basics right, and AI is the next evolution. It's the overlay on top of solid digital marketing. And I say this because I've spent many years working with marketing teams who have pursued initiatives like personalization, which have been, heavily sold in by vendors. No one could disagree with the idea of delivering personalized experiences. But when we got down to it, really, there was an awful lot more, I think, foundational work you could have done in terms of, optimizing paid media spend, looking at your insights, trying to connect different data stores so you had all of the customer data in one area so you could identify and understand and analyze how your marketing campaigns and activities are influencing the customer experience. And that's my really takeaway from this, really, is that, hopefully everyone on the call today has an interest in AI. I know it's top of mind for like a million businesses, but in terms of practical application, be honest with what you need to do as a business and whether AI is the next item that slots into that roadmap over the next, couple of months. We get asked a lot how to decide, use cases for the application of AI. That your business is complex, it's large, you've got lots of different customer segments to go after, you advertise across a bunch of different platforms. There's so much you could potentially be using AI for. Where do you start? And in one sense, listing out use cases by the dozen within a room, put them on a whiteboard, that's not a bad way to start. But I always think it's better to work backwards from how your customers currently interact with you and look at how AI can slot into different parts of that journey. Obviously, every travel and hospitality business will have a different customer funnel of how they interact with them, depending on the type of products and services you provide. But just taking the generic example, as I got on screen, what I've done with this slide is bucket up a traditional travel business into its various discrete segments, from inspiration. I'm considering a trip, I'm doing some research, I'm shortlisting a bunch of different options from a couple of different companies, looking at the booking process. I place a booking, make my payment. It's in a couple of months' time. There's a gap between booking and going on the trip. Then sort of the in-trip experience, and then what happens after that. And I always think if you as a marketing team, if you're struggling to define where to apply use cases, looking at the customer journey and breaking it down in that fashion, and then sitting down and brainstorming ideas of how AI could influence, improve not just the customer experience, or perhaps from an internal perspective, perhaps speed things up. Perhaps on the inspiration side, It's the bottleneck is in getting out, relevant targeted content. So perhaps AI, Gen AI could help support with the campaign flow. But the basic idea is let's work backwards from that customer journey and let that lead the definition of potential use cases. But even once you've built up a list, it could be a short list, it could be a large list. You could have 2 items you've mapped out. You could have 20 items you might potentially want to do. You still need to decide, where you should apply your efforts. That time, money, etc. And in terms of how you sanity check that for yourself, there's a couple of basic things you could ask yourself. Revenue, time save. So this idea, if you're interrogating it specifically, what potential impact does it have? Is it on the revenue side, i.e., is it customer facing? And is it something that's going to influence perhaps increased conversions? Is it going to influence the potential overall sort of checkout basket size of your products? Is it something that's internal? Is it saving marketing teams time? Is it enabling you to produce more campaigns? So a simple way is to assess each use case on that sort of impact readiness metric. And the other side is you could have a use case that is going to impact revenue, that if you could deploy it, potentially might help increase your conversions rates by X, for example. However, it requires a high level of complexity to get over the line. And we're going to talk about a few examples from some well-known brands later on where it's fair to say they probably have quite a high level of complexity in order to achieve those results. So this could be something like it requires integration with various different systems. It requires a deeper data layer into your business. And just the general complexity around it is perhaps prohibitive to an initial POC. There's no right or wrong answer. Every business is different. But looking at potential impact and potential complexity delivery are a way of defining which use cases you could potentially move forward with. There's no right or wrong answer here. The way, I suppose, not just we here at Analogic, but probably lots of brands in the world, when they're approaching the use of AI and where to apply it and the risks involved, probably look at it from a similar point of view. So the internal to the customer facing. Just working on the customer facing, obviously there's more risks involved. Every company we speak to, from I suppose board level down, are super interested in the potential of AI to make their businesses more efficient and help separate them from competitors. But there's no getting away from the fact that if you're utilizing AI within the context of some form of customer-facing interaction, whether that's streamlining calls coming into your business by automating that process, or having AI somehow influence the online experience, whether that's on the website or on an app, for example, by changing copy or suggesting pricing. There's not just the complexity, there's also the risk involved if you get it wrong. And travel businesses are so public facing that the backlash can be immediate. For that reason, look at the lower risk areas first, the internal improvements. I mean, obviously, a lot of these can sit outside of marketing, and most probably your companies are looking at the potential of AI to improve the wider aspects of the business outside of marketing. But within marketing specifically, look at how AI could help alleviate or improve the day-to-day tasks of your marketing team, whether you're a large team or a small team. There will be relatively quick wins that AI can potentially help you with. These are less risky. They can be triaged by a real human. They can be checked. And basic takeaway is you can have positive gains without necessarily the risks involved in it going wrong for a public-facing interaction. That being said, we want at some point to start using AI in a public-facing initiative. You might have a high level of traffic, a very large database, lots of visits. AI has the potential to deliver a relevant experience for a greater number of users in a measurable way. So it's something that should be considered. It's just it needs to be considered in a considered fashion. Because AI, like I mentioned personalization previously, like with, personalization, and I would say AI is the next level up on what personalization can do, and we'll talk about that later on. But I would say a lot of what comes down to the success of any AI POC or project is good old-fashioned data integration. It's the data layer that sits behind the systems you're involved in, whether you are building your own internal AI tools or you're leveraging off-the-shelf systems that are out there in the market. Either route you go down requires a data layer being fed into these. So it has, for example, the context about your business, brand, tone of voice. It has a full understanding or access to things like your products, how are your products stored within your database, what contextual information is available to the tool around. If you're like a cruise company, does it have full access to your booking database, your calendars? Does it have access to the type of items you can add to a booking? That is, I suppose, what the customer sees is the tip of the iceberg, on what most marketing teams we work with on the marketing team side and the technology side is around the rest of the iceberg, which is that data. How is it being plumbed into the system? How clean is that data? Because the successful failure of that project will be determined by that. So, the use cases, maybe the exciting bit, how do we use it to suggest, next best offers? How do we handle inquiries, etc.? But without that data layer being set up correctly, it's going to be far more difficult to provide consistently correct responses or messages at scale to your audience. So what goes into initial proof of concept? Now, I've looked at, and I've had loads of questions from people who signed up today, so I really appreciate that. And hopefully I'm able to cover off most of the questions which have been sent to us. And I know from a lot of the emails I've received, everyone's at a different point of their journey. Some have, on today's call, are relatively mature in terms of the rollout of AI. Some have started with a couple of POCs. Some are just thinking about what they could do. So I appreciate everyone is in, I suppose, different stages of their journey. So I'm going to go through our approach, our methodology. It's obviously a cut-back version for today's webinar, but happy to go into far more detail, answering questions anyone has later on. But before we go into that, a question to ask yourselves before, I suppose, you deploy any form of proof of concept around AI within your own businesses. Can your stack recognize a customer, recall what they did, and act on it? So every AI capability sits on a foundation, and its output is capped by the quality of that foundation. So, input to output flow. So quality in, quality out. Now, there are two families of AI. So we've got sort of things like machine learning, which predicts and classifies from your data. So this could be, for example, forecasting visitor numbers if you're that type of company, or predicting which customers may potentially lapse. And then the language models which overlay this will generate and interpret that data and that text, and that could support things like drafting copy or answering inquiries. Now, the question is, do you have a system in place at the moment that can recognize a customer, can it recall information on a customer, and have the potential to act on it? Just taking a step back or before we look at things like methodology. getting away from the vendor trap. We work, invariably as a consultancy, we work with lots of different technology companies, and they provide, awesome tools that deliver great experiences. Every company we work with will have, a relatively complex marketing technology stack. It is given that you will buy in tools to deliver a range of digital experience initiatives. But I would be wary of being, I suppose, suckered into the vendor trap. Every technology company we work with is bringing out new features around their platform. In the old days, it could have been like, we got a really cool feature around personalization. It'll get marketers excited, and people will buy into the platform without, I suppose, working backwards from a basic concept of, was that the initiative your customers really needed, or do you have a bunch of basic things you had in place? I think AI has amplified it. Every company we work with will have AI services built into their platforms now, and they will be pushing their sales teams to, I don't blame them, talk about the AI capabilities of their product. But I would argue that work backwards from the customer problem you're trying to solve. Is it about trying to deliver a better experience in trip? Because we're going back to that, breaking down the customer journey by funnel type. Work backwards from those customer problems and then ascertain if the features from an existing platform vendor or a potential new solution you're looking to buy in will provide a solution and add value as part of that initiative. And then specificity on use cases, because there's so much you could potentially apply AI for. It could also be an inhibitor to trying something new. And one of the things we always say is trying to be as specific as possible. So at a basic level, yes, potentially at a sort of top line, it can help you sell more holidays, but actually that doesn't help you narrow a use case down to something where you can start fleshing out what it means in terms of what you need to do as a team, what systems need to be involved, what data needs to be plumbed in. So can we break it down to something as specific as, can AI prompt, can it help support abandoned bookings within the current email flow? Can you be specific? A flip side today is the more specific you get, perhaps it also might increase the complexity of that POC. But again, there are ways of setting out and scoring, the different types of use cases you might put together as a team. So I'm going to talk about an example use case. So this is not the one I would necessarily suggest you would do. This is just to help frame I suppose, the next couple of minutes of today's session. So, if you as a team sat down and fleshed out 6 potential use cases, demand sensing, searching for inquiry patterns so you could forecast better if you're a ticketing type business, for example, next best consideration, content at scale, inquiry handling, all of these. I'm going to focus on booking recovery. So can an AI prompt recover more abandoned bookings than the current system you've got in place? It's specific, but also it gives us something to measure against. You can look at what your current recovery rate looks like in terms of a percentage. And then if we're looking at an AI-driven equivalent of this as a POC, we've got a measurable number to benchmark this against, so that hopefully once you deploy it, you can turn around to the business and say, we had a X percentage and now it's gone up or gone down by whatever that figure is at that time. So talking about it from the perspective of, say, a visitor attraction business, so you will look to initially diagnose. So look to see where your systems are sat. If it's an email platform that influences the recovery process, how is that integrated with a website? What data is being fed into that? Do we have a good overview of the recovered bookings? How does that tie into your inventory? How is it set up? And through the separate phases. So we would break it down for your specific type of business to ascertain the feasibility of a POC like this. So the question's always with an AI POC, before you, I suppose, waste time and money deploying something, doing something in anger, is always to ascertain if it's the right thing you should be doing. I'm a big believer you should, as a marketing team, should always try new things and push the envelope. And that's how you grow and improve. And that's why the experience for your business this year is completely different to what it was, say, 3 years ago. That being said, time is tight. Every business now is trying to do more with less. And if you're going to do something, you want to sanity check that it's going to have the greatest impact possible. Because if it's not, you may want to look at something elsewhere. So with the recovery process as the example, always look to involve some sort of baseline measurement figure so you can benchmark it. I think one of the interesting things about AI now is how little information we've got in the world. I went to a marketing tech conference in Greenwich recently, and it had a great agenda around MarTech topics and AI. And actually, the disappointing thing was the lack of, I think, specificity, exactly what people did in terms of AI. It was great on topic, and it just didn't give you sort of hard numbers of what people are doing. And I think that's probably indicative of the fact that AI is still very new. Businesses are trying it out. They're not necessarily measuring its success or failure. They're just trying things. And that information of what could look like hasn't really filtered out into the wider market. So I think everyone is trying to find out more. But for your own internal projects, trying to find out what other people did is great. But I think you can't rely on that. I think you have to put a baseline measurement figure yourself, so you've got something to contrast, compare an initiative with, so you know if it had an impact or not. You also need to understand if you've got that tone of voice, if you have that information available to plug into the system, what individual data are you allowed to plumb into the system? This is typically where legal comes involved around the use of customer data. And ownership of POCs. Will there be one person owning the direction of this who can help agree which POC you should focus on, which use case it should be, and where the value is? And looking at this example of AI across the booking recovery process, where can AI potentially influence that process? And which is why I say AI is the overlay of the foundational elements that you should hopefully have in place. So, for example, do you have a unified customer layer already in place? Customer data platforms are not a new thing. You may be using alternatives to vendors' CDPs, but the idea that you're using a system to integrate data from a bunch of different systems, from e-commerce platforms to website, to your mobile applications, to CRM, do you have that integration layer already in place? Because that's the layer that's going to feed an AI overlay that's going to influence, in this case, recovering bookings, people who visit, show intent, but don't book. So we want to use AI to predict the drop-off, place suggestions in terms of personalized copy for the website, perhaps triggering emails, perhaps having dynamic pricing. All of these things AI can influence, but it's that data layer that's going to make it a success. Now, for the next couple of slides, before we go on to a few brand examples of AI in the wild, I've tried to take I've taken our internal analogic methodology that we use when we work with customers, and I've tried to distill it and simplify it for today's presentation. But if there was one takeaway for the attendees for today's session, it would be, look at, and I'll share these slides afterwards. Each of these are the areas that you want the team involved with. So preparation. What is the purpose and purpose of this POC? What is the application? The KPIs. Can we have a hard measurement figure to determine the success of this? The internal workshops in terms of the teams involved outside of marketing. Do you need development? Do you have a marketing operations team? How do you deploy technology changes within your organization? Do you need to lean on external agencies as part of that process? How have you incorporated those in terms of the planning? Building and deploying. Have you already invested in some AI off-the-shelf platforms? Do you need to build your own tools because separate businesses, but we work with a couple of banks, and they invariably want to build their own AI systems for data compliance reasons. So what systems do you have in place? How would you roll out technology changes within your company? And like with, I would compare an AI project with something like a CRO or optimization project. How are we managing the discrete tasks, the backlog, break each thing down into who owns it, who's handling it, and how is it going to be deployed? And one of the things I always enjoy is around a charter for the delivery of an AI project, a simple document that allows you to provide a reference point that can be shared within the wider business, that details exactly what you're going to do, how is it going to be measured, how it will be delivered, the time frame for delivering a simplified POC, what are the implications of deploying this? For example, does it require specific guardrails around the use of personal information? How are you feeding things like brand tone of voice so you can protect the brand out in the public? A simple document that allows the business to understand the risks involved, and so they know what they are signing off. And I've put together, again, this is massively simplified from a couple of examples that we have, a way of measuring the success of those POCs and the impact they have. So what are others doing in the world? Well, as I mentioned before, it's incredibly hard actually to get super good examples. And so I spent a lot of time doing some research around brands and what they're doing. So I've got a few in the hospitality travel world, as you might be surprised. So Expedia, obviously well-known brand. They've incorporated a tool to allow people to, it's an interactive travel bot that allows people post-booking to leverage Expedia to help improve that experience. So it could be trying to identify things to do in Barcelona, restaurants to go, attractions to visit. And it sits discreetly within the camp of, well, you've booked your main trip. We now want to keep you within our ecosystem, and we want you to buy further stuff from us by interacting with us as a business. I think it's interesting for a couple of reasons. It's obviously the potential for things to go wrong are great because it's the tip of the iceberg. It's the thing that the public see. But what they don't see is the work that goes behind trying to deliver a tool like this. How was the data team involved? How was legal involved? How was tech involved? Expedia built this on a combination of off-the-shelf models and using in-house tools that they built and integrated. But I mean, everyone on today's call, I suppose, takeaway from me would be how would, if you were trying to create something similar, how would your product database be managed to feed into a interactive travel bot like this? Can you surface your database in a way that provides contextual information that's relevant to each visitor to a bot like this? Similar to Expedia, TUI have created a travel companion to help users shortlist holidays. And I know this is useful for my own searches for a family holiday with the kids on TUI this August, because they have an enormous range of places you could go with them. But beyond, I suppose, the comparisons with Expedia, I think the use case for other travel companies on today's call, beyond shortlisting holidays and activities and attractions, I think it's how they've leveraged first-party data and contextual information like geo-IP signals to surface those recommendations. So if you're approaching a similar product, it would be like, how would you feed that data into a tool like ChatGPT to present these results? What systems do you have and how well integrated are they? The interesting thing about the application of AI is in instances where traditional forms of marketing can now be enhanced. So we've talked about customer data platforms, so tools which collect all of your customer data into a single store. That is not, I suppose, a new initiative, and neither is the desire to leverage that data to drive a personalized experience, personalized offers, for example. But what's interesting about the Virgin Atlantic story is in how they fed that data into an AI decision engine to automate and scale the volume of personalized experiences. So we're used to next best offer in things like the e-commerce space. For product people, I think there are superb vendor-led tools for that. Where I've seen personalization fall down is outside of those e-commerce driven experiences. And I would equate personalization in those instances with sort of pre-industrial, having to create manual rules, having to create a lot of logic around the deployment of a personalized experience. And where I see AI enhancing or supercharging personalized experience outside of product recommendations is in scaling personalized experiences for people who interact with your mobile app, with your website, and with things like email. And I think this is a great example of where AI solves a legitimate problem, which is, you may have a large amount of visitors to your website each year, and you want the ability to understand contextually what each person may be potentially interested in based on how they're interacting with your website, the products they're looking at, their search history, their returning history. How do you utilize that data to then change the experience? And I think from an optimization point of view, this is where AI, I think, comes into its own. How AI feeds, I suppose, the next level up of CRO work of personalization at scale. And I think that's super exciting and something we're having a lot of discussions about at the moment. And to continue the Virgin trend, so Virgin Voyages, I thought this was an example. They launched a tool called Emil Ellie, so an AI-powered assistant, and talking about AI applications for external use cases and for internal, and look at the easiest use cases first before you move on to the more complex ones. I thought this was a great example of AI being used to solve an internal marketing problem, namely around the speed and efficiency of getting out as much relevant content as possible. So in this instance, version has a very distinct brand tone of voice. And if you're going to use AI to scale that outbound communication, they didn't want to lose that voice. So freeing up their marketing teams by feeding in that brand tone of voice into an AI engine to automate that. So I think that was quite a good example of action in the low-hanging fruit of AI applications. And perhaps a little bit less well known, SevenRooms. So they are a platform that helps businesses like restaurants manage things like reservations. And I thought this was a super interesting use case of AI for how it supports, well, potentially smaller organizations who have lots of customer interactions but are relatively time poor. So they've leveraged AI to help automate customer feedback. So to automate the process of replying to customers, responding to customers, obviously feeding in their tone of voice. And I thought that was a good example of a task that provides, enormous value. Customers want immediate response, but these businesses are incredibly time poor. And where they do have time, they want to deploy it to areas where they can have the greatest impact for customers. So can they automate the, wouldn't say simple things, but the things which are in bulk? And before we end for today, I just want to say thanks everyone for joining us today. We've had a lot of questions coming in before today's webinar, so hopefully I've been able to answer during today's session as many of those as possible. If I didn't cover anything that you want to know, feel free to drop a question in the Zoom chat or ping me an email. You can use the email on screen, hello@analogic.io, or I'm sure you've got my email address from some of the emails I sent last week. I'd just like to say thank you to everyone for joining us. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you on a session in the future.